It's good to see you. Look, as we've been reporting on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's trip to Ukraine, before she left, she indicated that there's still no decision on whether the Ukraine aid package would be linked to COVID funding. So let me put the question to you. Do you think the two measures should be linked?
I think we're going to see what the Senate sends us, but, they're both national security issues, right? What's going on in Ukraine, having additional variants come out of COVID if we're not able to help other countries with vaccines and help right here in the United States. So they should be linked. Unfortunately, the Republicans said no more funding for COVID, no new funding anyway for COVID. You'd have to find unused dollars. There aren't a lot of those. So, we've been postponed on really getting a COVID bill passed. Ukrainian aid for Ukraine has to happen. So if the quickest way is to link them, let's do that. If the quickest way is not to and get both done, let's not. But we have to get both done. And that's ultimately our responsibility, no matter what, rhetoric we've heard from some of the Republicans.
Well, I think you just hit at the key point there, the quickest way to get this done. I guess, given the urgent needs in Ukraine, given that that there's already bipartisan support for that Ukraine aid, why not just get behind a push to fund the Ukraine aid first and then deal with COVID funding immediately after? Is that the smarter strategy?
Yeah, I tell you, that's going to be up to the Senate. They're sending it to the House. But, we thought the COVID funding was a slam dunk in the House until the Republicans put an artificial line in the sand about COVID funding. And yet I would argue, as you look at South Africa right now with some additional Omicron variants, starting to cause a little surge again, we don't tell COVID when it's done. COVID will let us know when it's done. So we have to keep funding that as an urgency as well. So both issues are important. Adults in both parties need to get these done and move them forward. And we can't be held hostage by just a few people who are trying to appeal to some partisan rhetoric during primary season. But both are priorities, absolutely.
Let's talk about the other big priority for Democrats, which is getting elements of Build Back Better passed. Senator Joe Manchin has indicated he's willing to work on three key areas, right? Lowering the price of prescription drugs, climate reform, and lowering the deficit. Do you think, realistically speaking, that there's common ground to be found between progressives like yourself and Senator Manchin on climate reform? Is that realistic?
Well, we already have found ways to get giant bills through Congress, right? The American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion that got money in people's pockets and shots in people's arms, people back in jobs.
Climate is very tricky, as you know, Congressman. Climate is very tricky, particularly Senator Manchin has priorities that are not shared by a number of Democrats.
I think we're going to keep trying to do a legislative strategy, but also the Progressive Caucus has encouraged the president to take executive actions. Now, we know those aren't permanent. They can be changed by a future president. They're not as easy to do in some areas as actual legislative change. But I'd say it's an all and above category. Let's get everything possible done in any way possible. Democrats have already done really big things. Like I mentioned the infrastructure bill, the Postal Reform Act, the Competes Act about getting the cost of computer chips down so we can really get at inflation. We've got a lot of things to juggle. And I think that if we can do it legislatively, let's move those legislatively. If the president can do executive action, let's do that. If we can do both, let's do both. But the bottom line is action is the word that we all have to be following.
I do want to ask you about the push for executive actions in just a moment, but let me just follow up very quickly, if I might. If at the end of the day, there's only agreement on lowering the cost of prescription drugs, is that something that you would support, a standalone measure on prescription drugs only?
Yeah, again, I've seen nothing in writing through all these talks. And as you know, some of us have lived through this for now about 6 months. I'll believe it when I see it. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep pushing to get things done. And one of the best ways is by having the president move forward with executive action.
And let me ask you quickly about the deadline. Conventional wisdom is that Democrats have to get a deal by Memorial Day. Do you perceive that to be the deadline? Are you eyeing Memorial Day to get something done?
I was told originally it was by the State of the Union. I was told originally by the end of the year. I've heard a lot of deadlines. What I'll tell you is, and what I've told the president and others, let's just do whatever we can now, right? If it's executive actions that can happen quicker, let's do that. If it's legislation, we'll move that. Right. The bottom line is Democrats are going to continue to deliver for people, but let's not worry about what one person says or whatever. Let's get things done. And then if we get multiple things done, all the better for the American people.
Let me ask you about executive actions. It seems like the likeliest possibility at this point is that the president is considering taking action on student loan debt. And according to recent reporting, he's eyeing forgiving about $10,000 per borrower, potentially based on income level. Is that enough for you, $10,000 per borrower?
Well, we've been encouraging to go higher, but honestly, doing an executive action, even on 10,000, is huge for the average person. We're also encouraging things around climate change, on healthcare, on workers' rights and protections. There's a lot that the president can do, and I think will do, because, the Republicans aren't moving anything forward in Congress. So we have no partners in a 50-50 Senate and a 3 or 4 seat margin in the House, depending on, who hasn't passed away. It's incredibly hard to get anything done legislatively, but we've gotten a lot done. In the meantime, the president can also move ideas forward. And I think, absolutely forgiving student debt is one of those, but there's a whole big list. And I think you're going to see more action from this White House.
I do have to ask you about the midterms. As you know, there's big disagreement right now in your caucus over this race, Shontel Brown versus Nina Turner. Bernie Sanders is standing by his endorsement of Nina Turner, despite the CPC's endorsement of Brown. And if you think about it, one of the strengths of your caucus is your ability to stay unified. What do you make of this divide? Does it spell trouble in the future for your caucus?
We have almost 100 members, and when we took the vote, no one voted not to endorse Shontel. So I don't know if the divide that, some of the journalists in Washington, D.C., for some of the Capitol newspapers like to say, but we didn't have it when we endorsed someone. And, the good news is you've got 2 great progressives running. I mean, we like this option. What I don't want to have options is where we got people who are, not going to be supporting things like Medicare for all and other priorities. Here you've got people who are, and I think at the end of the day, that's good for the people of Ohio and good for the American people, but people in that district will ultimately make the decision.
All right, Congressman Pocan, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Good to see you.